Thank you. It's good to have this conversation. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk about it, especially with athletes who are putting this stuff into practice, because then you get a little better idea of what works and what doesn't. My name is Dave Laughlin, and I've been doing this, some version of this, probably for about 15 years. First, primarily as a university professor, and then I've transitioned more to just applied work in mental performance over the last 5 or 6 years. My background was in baseball, so I played baseball, high school, college, and then initially my thought was I wanted to coach. So, I had a little exposure to the mental game as a baseball player and thought, okay, that would be a great degree to get if I want to coach at the college level. So I coached high school baseball. I was doing a graduate assistantship coaching baseball while I pursued a master's in exercise science with a sports psychology concentration. And then I pretty much realized, like, while doing that, like, I don't want to coach baseball. Like, this is not, I don't even care if we win. Like, I just want to go home. So I was like, I got to figure something else out. But I had gotten more interested in the mental side of it. So when I left that, I was teaching baseball lessons and trying to get some traction with doing stuff on the mental side with athletes. But at that time, like 15 years ago, just coming out of a master's program, if you weren't going to take it into a military population, there weren't a lot of opportunities. And I was not like so I went back and did a PhD in sports psychology and motor behavior at University of Tennessee. And that pulled me more in the direction of not just like motivation, confidence, those kind of things, but really how do people learn their specific sport skill, and how does the mental side relate to how they learn it, and then how do they perform it under pressure. So that's the approach that I really come from at this point. And I did 3 years at a school in Alabama called Huntington College, where I was a professor there. Then I did 6 years at Grand Valley State University outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, as a professor. And then for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working with a guy named Rainer Meisterjan who started Courtex Performance. And that's where we kind of came into some work with Under Armour and met all of you. And now I do that primarily, and then I still teach some classes as an adjunct professor. But my approach is definitely from the skill side and the skill acquisition side. So I'm very much interested in where people are focusing their attention and how they can manage their focus. And then how does that manage how they learn movement skills, how they train, how they practice. And then what does that mean in terms of competition, how they can perform. So a little bit less maybe on like goal setting or motivation or confidence, and more just like I look at everything as kind of filtering through focus. It all kind of comes back to that. And no matter what you're doing, it's going to influence your focus. Then your focus is going to influence your performance, your technique, all of those things.
Awesome. Yeah, Dave, thank you so much for that introduction. That's a lot. You've been in the game for a minute. 15 years is definitely nothing to play with. And that's a long time. So you definitely come with a level of expertise that many like myself aspire to be at. So my question for you is, you mentioned how you were teaching, you started off as a teacher or professor and then started working with more high-level athletes and things of that nature. And do you see a difference in terms of like the client? So meaning when you teach these students, you're probably teaching them psychology and things of that nature. Do you notice any patterns that is similar or even different to some of the athletes that you coach?
Okay, so looking at kind of what it's like to teach the content to the students first, to really apply the content with high-level athletes.
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, when you're teaching the content academically, you're teaching, okay, this is the theory. These are the theories behind why people are motivated, how they move. These are some like interventions we would use. Here's how people do imagery. Here's how they do goal setting. And you're really you're teaching people the sum of all the research evidence and what it says on average is going to work. And then you go work with an individual athlete, and you're not dealing with average. You're dealing with one person, one team that has a very unique, individuals are unique, teams are unique. So I feel like initially as a student, it's you kind of get the idea, oh, I'll just learn this stuff and I'll apply it like it's a math formula. And then when you get in there, you realize, well, this is really messy. Things that are supposed to work aren't working. Things that aren't supposed to work seem to be working. Like this athlete gravitates toward one thing. So I think that doing some of the applied work while I was an instructor, I felt was always important because you had to be able to speak to, does this stuff actually work?
Yeah.
And when doesn't it work? And how do you make the call between how we're going to apply this? And as I got farther along into a university job, you get less and less time and opportunity to actually do the work. And you just feel farther removed from what it is you're teaching. So I think it was like 2017 was when I had reconnected with Reiner, who I knew from my PhD program. And like I took a job as a university professor. He just started his own company. And then things had kind of come full circle. We reconnected and he was looking at player evaluation ahead of the NBA draft with an NBA team. And at that time I was using a research instrument in my teaching and research. So we reconnected just to try to get kind of collaborate so that he could have a way to better understand athletes very quickly as he was running them through this pre-draft interview process. And that was really fun because you immediately saw like everything that I think I'm going to see is going to make up these athletes, and they're going to be this unique group in one particular way. Like for the most part, I was just dead wrong. Like it was very different. Like outside of, okay, they're going to be confident and they're going to like to exercise. Like everything I thought I would see in this group, it was all over the place, and people were individuals to a much greater extent than I would have thought. So I think that's the major difference, is that when you're looking at teaching the content, teaching the ideas, we're always talking about, well, this is the average, this is on average. And it might describe everybody, but it actually might not describe anybody individually. So when you're dealing with an athlete in front of you, you have to be able to work with the theory and with the data and the research and all this evidence that you have, but also understand that I've got to figure out what's going to work for this individual, and I got to figure out where they're going to be like what I expect and where there's going to be some differences. So it's just a little more, I guess, a lot messier in application, I think.
Yeah, I could see it being a lot more messy because I think also, and this is probably one of my biggest issues with the school system in general, especially at the high school level and below, is that a lot of times they'll just give teachers a curriculum and say, all right, here, just give it to the kids. Meanwhile, many kids have different learning styles. Many kids have there's many different styles in general. And I think school doesn't really tailor to the needs of the individual, but kind of tailors to the needs of the average man, like you were mentioning earlier. And then sometimes I think when you're teaching, you can kind of apply that same concept to the individual, and you realize like, no, this person is way different and way above average or maybe even below average than the average person. And so you really have to be able to tweak and tailor your teaching to fit the needs of this individual athlete. And so I think what you said was very profound, and I agree with that.
Yeah, and I would to kind of add to that, that was one of the things, even in the classroom experiences, as you teach for longer, I was getting to that place where I was like, man, like there's all kinds of different approaches that people need to work. How can I offer flexibility and individuality in this group of 35 students? And I would try to do that, and I'd kind of move away from traditional grading or just do a lot of formative stuff or open things up for people to have flexibility on what they did for a final project. And with a group of 35, like part of the problem there was for a lot of students, that was completely just overwhelming. Like they just wanted, I can't deal with this level of freedom. So really working one-on-one with somebody just is it's a good fit for how I like to operate, because I'm not very organized or rigid with like how I ran a classroom. And I think that had a lot of, that wasn't always the best thing as a classroom instructor. I think as an applied practitioner in sports psych, like being able to adapt and being able to meet a client where they are and be able to think creatively and do things different ways and just say, I know we were going down this road, but it's not working. We have to try something else. Like those are strengths that sometimes weren't always in the best interest of 35 students, but they work really well. I think working one-on-one with a team or an individual.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so then my next question leads to, why did you get into the sports psychology field in the first place? Like, why did you get into coaching and coaching individual athletes? I know you said like how you got into it, but let's get into why.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, well, sports has always been like, that was always part of my life. And I was always I look at my daughter now, and she's not all that interested in sport, but she's super social. And I was like the opposite. Like I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I was good at sports, and that was an easy place for me to like establish that people could see, okay, this guy's got some skills. He can speak with his athletic ability. And we don't care that he's kind of weird and he's not saying anything, right? Like he just goes out there and plays. So it was always part of my life. And then my dad, he was a high school physical education coach, and he was a runner in college and then coached track and cross country at the high school level, like when I was really young. And then as I got older, he started coaching the sports that I was playing. And never pushed me. I don't know why he never pushed me to run. And he's gone now, so I can't ask him. But like since I've started doing this stuff with Under Armour, I've been really curious. Like, you were a runner. Why didn't you ever put me on a track? Like, what's going on? You just always like supported all these other sports I was playing, but you never even mentioned like maybe you could run. So I don't know what the deal is there, and I'll never have an answer. But yeah, so he always had that. So I spent a lot of time just, like having your dad as a physical education teacher, like you got keys to a gym. Like you can always go up there and just play basketball. You can go in the equipment closet and just pick out any sport you want and do whatever you want. So that was always part of my growing up. And then I really liked, thinking about how to get better at a particular sport. So because I played baseball the longest and I'd done that collegiately, I thought, okay, this is the one that you coach. Like you coach the thing the best. And then in the course of trying to teach people, after I coached and I was just teaching baseball lessons to kids, like I was just like, man, I don't know how to teach this stuff. Like it's one thing when you've got a high level athlete, fine, like do this and they do it. But when you're trying to teach an 8-year-old like how to swing a bat, you suddenly realize like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I've just been riding on other people's talent here. Right. So that's when I had reached out to one of my professors from my master's programs to say, man, I think I need to like go study more because I don't know what is going on. He was like, oh, that's skill. That's motor learning. So he put me in touch with some people at University of Tennessee. And when I went there, I didn't even know what I was studying. I don't even know how I got in, because most of the time at this point, people go in, they know exactly what they want to do. They probably already published in their field. And I just wandered in and I was like, yeah, I'm interested in this. I don't really know what it is. And somehow I slipped through the system. So, I think it was just like always wanting to stay involved in sport because that had always been part of my life. And it had been a way that I felt competent, like to express myself and to go out there and find value and worth and identity and all of that stuff. And just trying to figure out a way to do it. And the traditional ways, I'll just be a coach, I'll do this. It really wasn't a good fit for me, but I kind of stumbled into something that was. And I was always, to be painfully honest, like I was just always good at school because you could just the reasons the school system that you talked about, it stinks. Like it was perfect for me. Okay, I just got to sit here. You just tell me what to do. I'm just going to memorize it and write it down. Yeah, I got it. Right. So I could fly through school. So, every time I'd go out into the world and be like, I don't know what to do, I'd be like, I'll just go back to school. Like, I know I can do that. And when you do that long enough, you just end up with a PhD. Right. So like, so some of it was just a matter of like knowing that I wanted to be involved in sport, not quite knowing where to do it, and just kind of bouncing back and forth between applying it and going back and getting education until I found a space where I was like, yes, this is what I like. This is where I can do this.
Interesting. I didn't know that. And I think everyone's story is unique and everyone's like path or journey to get to a certain place. It's always interesting to hear how people, end up at a certain area. So I think your story is cool. And honestly, to answer your question about why you think your dad didn't put you on a track, possibly he just didn't want to force you to do it just because he did it. And I think a lot of times, a lot of parents will, tell their kids, do this just because I did it. Like, I want you to play basketball because I was a basketball player. I want you to run track because I was a runner. Like, I know when I have children eventually, I'm probably not going to force my kids to run either. But if they want to, I'll definitely offer my expertise and stuff like that. And then I also know how parents can definitely pressure their children in terms of being really good in that athletic sport. And so have you had to deal with parents at the mental coaching level at all?
It was interesting because I was just having a conversation with another person I went through UT with, who he was in the Army and now he's retired and he's doing some consulting. And he was trying to negotiate that very question. Like, I'm trying to work with this young kid. Like, do you have any insight into how we kind of navigate all this? And I've been fortunate with, I don't want to say fortunate because like, it's not that working with children is not a good thing. It's just that I haven't had to deal with that. Like, I haven't had to deal with that because most of the clients that I deal with through Courtex are professionals.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. And sometimes we're dealing with NCAA programs. So we do occasionally get high school athletes who are really serious about what they're trying to do, and then you do have to navigate the parental aspect of it. But I think everything you just said is really the conversation I just had with the individual. Is like, you just always have to be careful. Like, you're having to kind of be there to be a boundary and make sure that what you're doing is to support the kid and what they're interested in, and that it doesn't become this kind of weird relationship where the parent is investing in something that doesn't matter to the child, and then they're putting pressure on you or they're leaning on you for insight. We've definitely had a couple situations where, like, the asks from the parent side were probably out of bounds, and we had to just push back and say, no, like, that's not how we're going to do this. That's not what we do. So I think just knowing very clearly on the front end, like, this is how I can make this arrangement work. This is the conversations I'll have. This is what I'll do to support the athlete. And then these are the kind of conversations that we can all have, or this is what we can share. And then this is how you can support the athlete. Because I think, what you said is right on. It's like, it doesn't matter if that's what the parent wants, if that's not in line with where the child wants to put their energy and their attention. And the best thing they can do is probably just be supportive and not necessarily get too involved in their sport performance in many cases. Just be there to enjoy it and support them.
For sure. No, for sure thing. And I think, like, it's the pressure that parents put on their children, man, is so crazy nowadays. And I see, like, comments on social media where kids will say they feel anxious about a certain game, not because of the expectation that the coach put on them or what their teammates put on them, but because of their parents. And I was like, what in the world? Like, because my parents didn't put any pressure on me when it came to track and field. Most of my pressure from my parents came academically. So when it came for track time, I was just able to perform without the outside pressure from my parents. But I know for a lot of kids, like, the car ride home after a game can be very stressful for them because they're afraid of what their dad is going to say or something like that. And then it's sad to see that, because now there's already a lot of pressure in performance. And then now you have an added level of anxiety because of an expectation that your parent might have put on you, or, and then now you're playing, not to lose because you don't want to let your parents down. And not even like, oh, I don't care if I let my teammates down or my coach down, but I just don't want to hear it from my parents. And so I think parents definitely have a big role to play when it comes to supporting their children in sport. And I just think they go about it the wrong way. Like, instead of, putting a lot of pressure, just let them have fun. And then, if anything, give them the mental tools needed to succeed in the sport, regardless of whether you want them to do that sport or not.
Well, I think that piece gets lost on it, even at the professional level. Like, just the idea that this should be movement is this inherently human, like, it's enjoyable to humans on this level, and it's motivating for a lot of its own reasons, and people are choosing to be there. And if we're making decisions or putting pressure on individuals, like, even if they're kids or they're professionals, like, a lot of times that is going to run counter to them actually performing at their best. So it's like, it's counterintuitive at times, but it's like, even with a lot of professional athletes, a lot of the conversations is not about, well, here's how you can do 15 more things to be better at your sport mentally. It's about, here's how you can do less. Like, here's how you can, like, give yourself permission to go do your work and then go do something else in these other times, so you can recharge mentally and you can recharge in terms of your focus, and you can do the things you need to do to get back and get after it in your sport when you're in your sport. But that doesn't have to be all you're about. And so I think it's like, it cuts the issue is, like, the professionalization is kind of trickled down maybe to youth sports in a way that can be really counterproductive. But in truth, it also would be more productive at times, even at the professional level, if we could have people just tap back into what was actually enjoyable about it. And I know there's all the aspects of, like, you still got to pay the bills, and there's all these things that are real considerations, but just helping people in the moment be able to recognize that those are real, and I do have to worry about them, but it does me no good to worry about them when I'm trying to actually do this thing. And I can develop some skills to say, you know what, right now I'm going to focus on what I'm doing, and it's going to be what it is. And then whatever happens, which is a lot harder when you got a lot of pressure on you.
That's true. I agree 100%. As a professional athlete myself, I couldn't have agreed more. There's definitely an added level of pressure now because, like you said, bills got to get paid. You have to perform at a high level or else you can get cut. And that's just the reality of it. But at the same time, multiple things can be true at once. Like, yeah, there's this pressure here. And at the same time, I can still have fun even though there's pressure around me. And honestly, one thing that helped me is that I look at pressure as a privilege. And like a lot of people dream to do their sport professionally. And so the fact that I'm here able to do this sport professionally and like, yeah, it's pressure, of course, but in all actuality, like real pressure, it's pressure, but it's not like real dire pressure. Like real pressure is a single mom who's struggling to raise her kids or something like that versus me. It's like, all right, I just have to run around these circles and hopefully, I'm saying, I have a good outcome. That's not, and I'm not taking away from my pressure, but it's just to kind of put things into perspective here. I think sometimes we get so caught up in, you know, our sport and all actual, like I've been doing track since I was 15 and or 15, 16 or whatever. And so it's something I've been doing. This isn't a new thing for me. Yeah, the elements might be a little bit different now, but it's still something that I've been having fun with throughout my teenage and early adult life. So I think when we learn to have fun with it, regardless of the pressure, good things can happen for sure.
Yeah, we wouldn't, you wouldn't assume that like worrying about all those outside things, even if they're real, would help in any other aspect of performance. It's not like, my plumber may have bills to pay, but when he's trying to change out the pipes in my house, like it's not helping him to be thinking about, well, I've
Yeah,
got this much. It's just like I'm focused on doing this thing at this moment. And I
yeah,
think that that's where you can learn, a lot of times at younger ages when you're just maybe not aware of the pressure until it starts to come from outside sources, you're just involved in the activity, you're doing the thing. Right. And then as it gets bigger, it's you're having to navigate the fact that you understand how much is at stake, or you understand even the privilege that you've been given to do this at this level, which is a privilege, but it also puts an added amount of pressure on you to perform well. That isn't there if you're just running around the track at your local high school for fun.
right, exactly. And the thing is, like what you said about how, your plumber might have bills to pay and he, it doesn't serve him anything to be thinking about the bills he has to pay while he's doing his job. And I think also even to, add another example, our opponents, in sport, our opponents don't care that we have pressure on us. They try and beat us at the end of the day. And so it's important that we're able to focus right in what's in front of us. There's a great mindfulness quote that I really love. Heard about it like 3 years ago. It said, be where your feet are. And so I really did my best to really focus on where I'm at presently and just focus on whatever it is, focus on the task at hand and whatever it is I have to do. And, with, different techniques, are there any type of techniques that you use to when it comes to coaching your athletes, like any mindfulness practices, any meditation practices that you give to your athletes for them to use?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like the be where your feet are is like that's one of the things that I feel like, I don't know, you might not be familiar with him because he's older. He's not even alive anymore. Ken Ravizza was one of the first people to really do this thing in the sports psych field.
Mhm.
And he got into like professional baseball and really took a lot of, but that was one of the things he said the first time I saw him speak, like just that's it. And if you think about, I mean, especially with the shoe company, like you can write the ad campaign right there, right? Like where your feet are, you just take that, run with it and make it yours. But yeah, as far as like, I think initially when you're going through the academic side of it, you learn about all these skills and tools, and it's like, okay, well, here's your imagery, or here's your goal setting, or here's your focus cues, or all this kind of stuff. But I think if like once you've been doing it a long time, you start to kind of feel, okay, what is like the biggest bang for the buck? Like where do I need to help people just dominate these things? And I think the mindfulness, that ability to focus on the present moment and do it neutrally, like admit what is, right? So it could be like, I'm about to run this race. I am nervous. Like, I don't want to get cut. Like you're owning that, but then it's like, and now what? You can get yourself to, but I still have control over XYZ. Like I'm still going to choose to go out there and compete in a way that I've decided I'm going to compete. I don't even necessarily have to be confident that I can win. I'm confident in the fact, or not even confident, I'm convicted in the fact that I'm committed to running the race in this way. Because when you look at the people that really accomplish things, and to your earlier point, outside of sport, accomplish things socially with social change or all these movements, like you wouldn't, a lot of them weren't confident they were going to be successful. In fact, they probably knew it was going to come at the cost of their life, right? But they were convicted on what they believed in, and they were just going to keep moving it forward because they knew this was the path that we were going to take. And if we're going to have progress, this is what it's going to look like. And you want to go out in a way that is consistent with what you value and what you believe. So I think the mindfulness piece has increasingly been big, teaching people to, can you just square up with what you're actually thinking and feeling? It's not about necessarily saying things self-talk that are positive all the time. It's not necessarily about just imagining yourself like winning every race. It's about being able to be honest with yourself. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. And then being able to have some simple tools, whether it's just using your breath or other types of techniques to get your body relaxed, to clear your mind, and be able just to put it on a focus cue that you know is going to work for you better than anything else might work. With, of course, the ideal state being that when you're really performing well, you're probably not thinking about anything. It's just happening. But that's not always going to be there. There's going to be days when it's not a place where you can access. So the next best thing is to figure out, these are cues that I know can work. If I can calm my body, clear my mind, and direct my attention towards some things that work. So I think that's the biggest bang for my buck, is like the mindfulness stuff in terms of acceptance and just neutral thinking, the breathing as just a way to manage your physiological state. And then when it comes to focus cues, the stuff in the skill acquisition side of it is really, how do you direct your attention towards, and running's a weird one, but in most sports, it's how do you direct your attention towards things outside of your body, like your environment and what you're trying to accomplish. So in basketball, it's the rim. In baseball, it's the ball, right? As a way to just let the movement take care of itself. Running, sometimes you get, the research is different there, because obviously your whole thing is you are controlling your movement. So it's a little bit of a more complex relationship. And I think that's been one of the things with doing some work with your team and your coach, Tom, that it's been really fascinating for me to try to understand, because it's such a different game than what I grew up playing and what a lot of times I work with within sport.
For sure, for sure. And no, thank you for sharing those techniques. I know you've been saying you've been in the game totally for 15 years, right? So obviously 15 years ago, 2008 or 2007, things were way different then than they are now. And so do you see a change in the athletes back then versus now? Like, do you think that athletes today are probably more anxious due to like things like social media? Or do you think that athletes back then were, less anxious or even more anxious back then? Who knows? Because maybe they didn't have the resources or the technology and the research that they have now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Well, it's weird because for the longest time, I would always push back when people would talk about generations being different. Oh, these kids are different today. I was like, well, like the world is different. People are going to respond differently, but we're probably not all that different than we were. But one of the instruments that we've used for a long time just to look at motivation, like this was actually the first time when they did their database where they found Generation Z. Like it was like fundamentally there had been some shifts just because the world had changed a lot. And you had the group that was just kind of demonstrating some different tendencies in terms of what inherently kind of made them go. So I do think a lot of that probably reflects things you've talked about. Like the world is much different. When I say 2006, 2007, you didn't have social media, you didn't have all this kind of ability to just engage with everyone all over the place. And now even like my daughter, she's 9, she was just telling me about something about some YouTuber that she watched and how brave this person is, because they get so much like negative comments and they just keep doing it. And they just and just the idea that your performance, whatever you do, everybody feels entitled to just chime in and say whatever they want about you. And then the fact that it's not to your face adds a whole other layer. So I do think that is a real, even looking through client social media accounts and just looking at the stuff that they have to deal with. And even not even necessarily well-known athletes or clients, and they're getting so much of this. I think that is the world looks a little different, and that's causing athletes to have to deal with some things in different ways, perhaps. But it's not like there wasn't pressure in other eras. It's not like, things change, but I think that you're right. Like there are some fundamentally different things about the space we're living in now because it's so um like just like worldwide, everything communication wide.
Now, I agree with that. And I also agree with what you said about how the different generations aren't as different as we think. We just are introduced to new things and we just handled it. We handle what we're introduced to basically. And I think if social media was out back in 2006, 2007, which it kind of was a little bit, but that had to be on like a desktop computer versus our phones. Um, I think our generation probably would have acted the same way if we're being completely honest. I just think, like you said, the access that we have to each other, the access to information is at an all-time high. You can get access to information with a click of a button now, simple. And so I do think that our generation, because we're all human at the end of the day, and humans don't really deviate that much from each other. And so I do think that if this stuff was all this technology was out in like the late 90s, early 2000s, then we probably would be dealing with the same stuff that we're dealing with right now.
No, that was always one of my, like, on the instructional side, university side, that was kind of a pet peeve. Like when people would give themselves credit for not falling victim to technology that didn't exist when they were the age that our students were.
Yeah.
Like I would never. Well, you didn't. How do you know? Like you didn't have to deal with it, so you have no idea. And the same thing with just kind of this idea that, oh well, the athletes today, or they're more sensitive, or all that. Like they've been given so much. What have we been given? Like if you look at the, like students in college right now, like what have they been given? Like they've been given a lot of really tough things worldwide over the course of the last decade to deal with, especially within the education system and in pandemics, all this kind of stuff. So I don't think that it's as simple as they have access to all of these wonderful things that we didn't have, and it doesn't come at a cost. Like everything's comes at a cost, and they're trying to navigate a lot and trying to manage a lot, and it's hard to manage all that. Like that's a lot of freedom to be able to go look, even talking to a client, a high school client the other day, and he was just talking about how he can't like help himself from looking up the team they're about to play against and looking at their stats and like starting to get worried about it, because it's available. And for me, like, I mean, yeah, being old, like when I grew up, like, okay, I would have to go to a newspaper, like literally like go through a newspaper and try to look up information. Every week they'd release who was leading the league in high school, in sports. Whereas he can do it on his phone at lunch in the lead up to a game and start to get nervous all day because he's having to manage like access to something. So I think it's difficult because it's tempting to say, okay, it's gonna be reassuring for me to see this and I'll have a plan. But then that comes with expectation, and that starts to put pressure on you as well. And I do think I saw it actually I'd seen it a few years ago looking at the NBA playoffs with Kawhi Leonard had a quote just about not looking too much at past performances, not worrying too much about the future, and just trying to stay present and have fun. And then it came up last night with Jason Tatum, who had a really bad series and then went off for like 51 points in game 7. He said the same thing. Like he just got back to doing his thing and having fun and being in the moment.
Yeah.
Not getting, like, you've done all the work, like you've made all the deposits. It's a time to just kind of rest and make the withdrawals on it. You don't have to keep worrying about it because that's going to drain your energy and possibly hurt your performance. And I think like in the sport like yours, it's like, when do you make that call as far as heading into a competition? For some people, it might be like, it has to be at like 48 hours ahead where you say, okay, like the strategy is set for the most part. Like I'm not going to worry about changing the plan. I'm just going to do what I need to do to stay ready and be rested. For some people, maybe it's 24. It might just be 12. Some people might be able to handle, I'm going to mess with this until the very moment it's about to start because that actually helps me. So it's always understanding too, like what's the payoff for performance and what's the payoff for enjoyment? Like, are they performing well and are they enjoying this experience? And I'd like to be able to say both. At the very least, I need it to be helping them perform because that's their job and that's their livelihood.
For sure, for sure. And I like what you said about, like, being present and how it's so important for athletes to do that, right? Because I'm one of those guys too. Like, I used to, and I sometimes still do, I look up who's in my race, who's in my heat, see what they've been able to do this season so far. But there was a quote that, well, this is an interview I watched by a world champion named Noah Lyles, and he said, yeah, this person might have run this fast, but you're not necessarily racing the performance, you're racing the person. And that kind of gave me a huge like shift, because I was like, okay, that makes sense. And a lot of times we think, oh, just because this person, scored this many points at this past game, or they ran this time at this race, that they're gonna do it, in this time. Yeah, they did it in the past. Yes, they're capable of doing it, but that doesn't mean they're gonna do that right now. And I think that athletes ought to know that, like, okay, yeah, this person on paper might have, done X, Y, Z, but you're not racing the paper, you're racing the person, or you're competing against the person. And they're not guaranteed to do X, Y, Z, because every performance at every game and every race is a different opportunity, and a new opportunity at that. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
No, and thank you, because that was like I had that same conversation with another member of your running group who said the same thing. Like, he had to like remind himself that even if he knew this person I'm running against, this is a time they have run, I'm not running against that time and that race. I'm running against them today, and I got to beat them today. And it's them that's, I'm just beating them,
Yeah,
or a chance to beat them, and anything can happen on any given day. So I do think it feels like, and it can be, on one hand, like a lot of the things on the mental side, we do encourage people at times to say, oh, you want to visualize this great performance and you want to think about all these things that's going to happen. But you also have to understand, like, how does that work for that individual? And is that actually helping them? Or does that create expectation? Does that create something that they can turn around and actually cause them to perform a little more timidly or inhibit their performance, as opposed to they've done all this work and they're going to control what they can control. And in some ways they almost do better remaining ignorant of everything else that isn't within their control. And different athletes just work in different ways. So you really got to figure out what's that system that works best for them.
that's true. That's a really good point. And I think I've even gotten caught up in that trap where, I visualize a certain outcome. I visualize like key components of the race, and I'll try to do my best to be in that specific spot and stuff like that. And it's backfired multiple times. And I think sometimes, like you said, just being responsive in where you are, and not sometimes not having a plan all the time, because you kind of go into it with little expectation. Because then when you have a big plan, you expect, all right, it's going to go like this, and this. And then if it doesn't go like that, you're kind of flustered and confused, because you're like, wait, this is not what I planned for. What's going on? But when you're able to have that adaptability, then you can, make those changes and pivots if you need to, and on the fly as well. And so to kind of conclude, what's one piece of advice that you would give to athletes who might be watching this?
I think the place where all of it starts is getting comfortable just being honest with yourself. There's a colleague of mine who calls it like self-honest self-observation, which is like a good way to put it, because you just realize, like, I don't, and acceptance doesn't mean you like it. It just means that you're squaring up with what is in the moment. Because ultimately, that, like, Under Armour, what the whole only way out is through, or whatever, that whole Under Armour, like, that's it, right? Like, ultimately, if you're feeling it, if you're thinking it, and you're feeling it. So you can pretend you're not. You can say, well, I should be feeling something else. No, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, that's where you are. Like, that's where you are. So that's where you're going to start. And you can learn that, perhaps true confidence comes from just squaring up with what is, and then deciding, even still, I'm going to go do this thing that I committed to. I'm going to run the race in this way. I'm going to try to manage my focus and just pay attention to what is, and trust my preparation to make the adjustments. So it's like you were saying, not so much having a plan, but being good at thinking about possibilities, and then directing your focus in a way that allows you to read and react in the moment for the race that you're running. Because you're not running the race that you planned. You're not running a race that you ran 3 years ago. You're running a race that you're in. So I think the best place to start is with what you're feeling and thinking in the present. So I do think that's the the simplest thing. And it's like, it's frustrating to think, oh, I've studied this for 15 years. And like, really all it is if people could just be present, they'd probably be okay. So, like that's it.
Yeah.
Right. But it's the same thing that probably all the like Buddhist monks have discovered, and all these people throughout life, philosophers, they've all come to the same place. Oh, like it's now. Like now is the time.
Power of now.
So you don't get too far ahead. You don't worry too much what you just practice reconnecting with the moment. And you can do that with the breath. You can do that sometimes with thinking, but thinking's pretty inefficient. So a lot of times it helps to have some other techniques. But yeah, I think that's the simplest thing. Is get present, get neutral, whatever is, acknowledge it, admit it, and then decide what you're going to do, even though this is where you're at.
Awesome. Thank you. And just one last thing, where can people possibly work with you and connect with you online?
The best place to get me is most of the work I do is with Courtex Performance. So just Dave at courtexperformance.com is a good email. If you go to courtexperformance.com, I'm somewhere on there and you should be able to get in touch there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave, for, being willing to jump on. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I think some of the things that you said and mentioned, I'm definitely going to put into practice for my own career. And thank you. I hope this really resonates with people watching.
Hey, thank you. Glad to do it.
Thank you.